Call to remove Confederate insignia names and monuments across the country has been matched by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
People know these names have to go. These names are white supremacists that said terrible things about our country. These names have to go from these bases, and these statues have to go from the Capitol.
The Southern Poverty Law Center identified more than 1,700 Confederate monuments, names, and symbols across the country, including 780 monuments and more than 100 public schools. But in Tennessee, the Republican-held legislature this week blocked efforts to remove a bust of KKK founder Nathan Bedford Forrest from the state Capitol building, which was put on public display in 1978. Joining us now is Brittany Cooper, Assistant Professor of Women's and Gender Studies and Africana Studies at Rutgers University. She's also a contributing writer for Cosmopolitan.com and the author of the book Eloquent Rage. So, Brittany, thank you very much for joining us. It is remarkable that statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest went up in the 70s, more than 100 years after slavery was ended. Why do you think that we are still having this debate in 2020?
Look, the thing about these statues is that they are advertisements for our values, right? The things that we choose to publicly commemorate tell us something about what we care about in this country. Part of the challenge is that we've decided in this insistence on leaving these Confederate memorials up that we actually want to advertise the worst of America. The Confederacy was the worst of this country, an internal schism, an internal war in order to keep Black people enslaved and in order to make white supremacy the rule of law and the rule of the land in this country. And so that's why we still have a very strong white supremacist strain in this country. We have a president that has decided quite vocally that he will govern in line with the values of white supremacists, that he will be openly antagonistic to Black people, that he will call out the U.S. military to police citizens, which is not something we've ever seen done on American soil. And it's compelling that it is being done to Black citizens in this moment, standing up against racial practices. So that is what these monuments speak to. That is what the love of them is all about. And look, I want the symbols removed. I grew up in the Deep South where people put Confederate flag bumper stickers on the back of their cars and said things like, it's heritage, not hate, when clearly it's a heritage of hate. So I have a deep investment in those things being removed. But I hope that the symbol is a prelude to the removal and the sort of rooting out of these white supremacist values in both our country, in terms of culture and in terms of policy.
It is not normal for the losers of a war, of a civil war that ripped apart a country, to continue to be celebrated in that country after that war was already lost. You don't see that generally around the world. What do you think, and these it's apparently still a debate in a lot of corners in this country, so what do you think of protesters, regular Americans taking it into their own hands and tearing down these statues, pulling them down as we saw in a number of places overnight?
Look, I think that what is going to save us in this moment is the will of the people. I think it's absolutely right to point out that these are also monuments to treason, right? If you rise up against this country and say that you want to take it over and govern it a different way, if any other group of people besides the white men who did that in the Confederacy had done it, we would call them treasonous. The Confederacy was a treasonous anti-American project, and it should be called out. We have a president that is fully lawless at this point, who cannot for some reason be held accountable by any of the laws and procedures that we currently have. And so now we're in a moment where that American democratic spirit, the will of the people rising up and saying, these are our values, we care about justice. We don't want to go back to a world where we have to have a civil war in this country to reinstitute American values that are about freedom and about our desire to be continually working towards democracy, even though we often fail at it. So I'm heartened by folks pulling these things down and saying, whatever kind of gerrymandering that keeps putting these conservatives in office, even though we know that statistically they are actually not the majority of Americans, that we are getting to see a visual resistance that says that there is enough of a liberal spirit in this country that even when we don't do great on race, we don't do great on white supremacy, that we can all agree that an overt investment in white supremacy is not something that any good any person of goodwill wants to be a part of.
Brittany Cooper, speaking of symbolism, and this might only be symbolism, but it seems to me it could be symbolism that would define what you say that what statues could mean. Juneteenth, it seems to me, it's surprising it's not a federal holiday. Here in Washington, D.C., it's a holiday. There are certain communities that set it as a holiday. It would be symbolic, but Juneteenth is a federal holiday. Is that something whose time has come?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, it's not surprising that Juneteenth isn't a federal holiday at this moment. We as a country, have been very resistant to acknowledging how deeply our histories of racism go. To acknowledge Juneteenth, to commemorate it, would be to acknowledge that even after the Civil War, that it took a full and extra year, 1866, June of 1866, before enslaved people in the state of Texas were actually told that they were free. And that says something about the ways that even when we win battles at the level of law, that they still have to make their way to the people and change their actual material conditions. I'm from Louisiana, the state that borders Texas, so I grew up celebrating Juneteenth. I would love for it to be a federal holiday. In many ways, it matters more as a freedom project than the 4th of July matters. If you've ever seen on social media on the 4th of July, many African Americans start reposting Frederick Douglass's speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July." And so we are in a moment of reckoning in this country, and anything that we can do at the federal level, look, symbol doesn't matter more than substance. But symbol makes way and signals to the country that we are in great need of a value shift. And so what I'm hoping is that these symbolic measures will lead us on the path and continue us on the path of this value shift that folks are fighting for in the streets around defunding police and seeking racial justice.
Let's celebrate the moments where we've done something right in this country, and that is a moment that federally deserves to be celebrated. Let's celebrate it. Let's educate people about it. I think you're absolutely right about that, Brittany. Brittany Cooper, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all of your time today. And coming up, as states continue to ease coronavirus restrictions, new data shows millions